The Oklahoma sun beat down mercilessly as Sarah Matthews collapsed to her knees in the wheat field, her swollen belly making it impossible to catch herself properly. 8 months pregnant and alone, she had been struggling to harvest what remained of her late husband's crop when the dizziness overtook her. The dusty earth rushed up to meet her face, and for a terrifying moment, she felt the baby shift violently inside her. "Help," she whispered. But her voice was lost in the endless expanse of golden grain. That's when she heard the thunder of hooves. Jake Morrison had been riding fence lines for the neighboring ranch when he spotted the figure in the distance. At first, he thought it was a scarecrow that had fallen over. But something about the way the fabric moved in the wind made him spur his horse closer. What he found made his heart slam against his ribs. A woman heavily pregnant lay unconscious. In the dirt, her dark hair spread like a fan around her pale face. Her dress was torn at the sleeve, and a thin trickle of blood ran from a cut on her forehead where she'd struck a rock. Jake dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground before his horse had fully stopped. He'd seen plenty of injured cattle and horses in his 32 years, but this was different. This was a woman, and she was carrying life within her. Ma'am, can you hear me?" He knelt beside her, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he checked for a pulse. Strong and steady, thank God. But when he looked closer, he could see the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. The way her clothes hung loose everywhere, except around her belly. She was starving. The woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing the deepest brown eyes Jake had ever seen. For a moment, they stared at each other in the blazing afternoon sun. A pregnant widow who had lost everything, and a cowboy who had never learned how to want anything beyond his next paycheck. "Please," she whispered, and Jake heard a lifetime of grief in that single word. "My baby, .. Without hesitation, Jake slipped his arms beneath her, lifting her as carefully as he would handle a newborn foal. She was lighter than she should be, all belly and bones, and the realization made something fierce and protective roar to life in his chest. "I've got you," he murmured, settling her sideways on his horse before swinging up behind her. "You're safe now." As they rode toward town, Sarah's head lolled against Jake's chest, and she breathed in the scent of leather and hay and something indefinably male that made her feel safer than she had in months. She should have been afraid. She didn't know this man, didn't know his intentions, but something in his voice, in the careful way he held her, told her she could trust him. Jake felt the woman relax against him and tried to ignore the way her proximity made his pulse quicken. He'd been alone for so long that he'd forgotten how good it felt to be needed. But this wasn't about him. This was about getting her the help she needed. Neither of them spoke during the ride to town, but something passed between them, in the silence or recognition. Perhaps that their lives had just changed forever. Dr. Henry Whitmore had delivered half the babies in Clearwater County, but he'd never seen a case quite like this one. Sarah Matthews lay on his examination table, while Jake Morrison paced the outer office like a caged wolf, his spurs jangling with each agitated step. "She's severely malnourished," Dr. Whitmore told Jake after completing his examination. "The baby appears to be healthy, but she's been pushing herself too hard. Another few days of this, and we could have lost them both." Jake's hands clenched into fists. "What does she need?" "Rest, proper food, and someone to take care of her. She's got maybe 3 weeks before that baby arrives, and she can't be living alone in that farmhouse, trying to work the land." The doctor's weathered face was grim. "I take it you're the one who found her?" "Yes, sir." Jake's voice was rough. Is there family? Someone who can help her?" Dr. Whitmore shook his head. "Sarah's been alone since her husband died in that farming accident 6 months ago. No family that I know of. She's been trying to keep the farm running by herself." But he trailed off, but Jake understood. A pregnant woman had no business trying to harvest wheat alone. "I'll take care of her," Jake said quietly. The doctor raised an eyebrow. "Son, you don't even know her." "Doesn't matter." Jake met the older man's gaze steadily. "She needs help, and I can provide it." When they returned to the examination room, Sarah was sitting up, her hands protectively cradling her belly. She looked fragile in the afternoon light filtering through the window. But there was steel in her spine that Jake recognized. She was a fighter. "Mrs. Matthews," Dr. Whitmore said gently, "I've explained your situation to Mr. Morrison here. You can't go back to that farm alone." Sarah's chin lifted defiantly. "It's my home, my husband's land. I won't abandon it." "Then I'll come with you," Jake said simply. Both Sarah and the doctor stared at him. Sarah's eyes were wide with surprise and something that might have been hope. "I don't understand," she said slowly. Why would you do that? You don't know me. Jake pulled his hat off and ran his fingers through his dark hair. How could he explain that something had shifted inside him the moment he saw her lying in that field? That for the first time in his life, he wanted to be more than just a drifter moving from ranch to ranch. Because it's the right thing to do, he said finally. And because no woman should have to face what you're facing alone. Sarah studied his face for a long moment, searching for deception or ulterior motives. But all she saw was genuine concern, and an honesty that made her chest tighten with emotion. I can't pay you, she said quietly. I barely have enough to keep myself fed. I'm not asking for payment. Jake's voice was firm. I'm asking for a chance to help. Dr. Whitmore watched the exchange with growing interest. In his 40 years of practice, he'd seen plenty of unlikely partnerships. But there was something different about the way these two looked at each other. Something that suggested this arrangement might be about more than just charity. If you're both agreeable, he said carefully, I think this could work. But Mrs. Matthews, you have to promise me you'll rest. No more working the fields, no more pushing yourself. Sarah nodded reluctantly. She didn't have much choice, and deep down, he was grateful for Jake's offer. The loneliness had been almost as hard to bear as the physical exhaustion. Thank you, she said to Jake, and the simple words carried a weight that made his chest tight. Don't thank me yet, Jake replied with a slight smile. You haven't seen my cooking. The Matthews farmhouse sat like a weathered ship in an ocean of wheat, its white paint peeling and its front porch sagging under the weight of neglect. Jake surveyed the property with a practiced eye as he helped Sarah down from his horse. Noting the broken fence posts, the loose shingles, and the general air of desperation that clung to everything. It's not much, Sarah said quietly, following his gaze. Robert always said he'd fix it up when we had the money, but ... It's got good bones, Jake said, and he meant it. The house was solid, built to last by someone who understood the prairie, winds, and the brutal summers. Just needs some attention. Sarah unlocked the front door with trembling hands. She hadn't been inside since the morning she'd collapsed in the field. And somehow walking through the doorway with Jake behind her felt like crossing a threshold into a different life. The inside was sparse but clean, with simple furniture and faded curtains that had once been blue. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light, and the air smelled of loneliness and barely remembered cooking spices. The bedroom's upstairs, Sarah said, suddenly self-conscious about the intimacy of having a man in her home. I can make up the sofa for you. Or there's a small room off the kitchen that Robert used for his accounts. The sofa will be fine, Jake said, setting down the supplies Dr. Whitmore had insisted they take. You need to rest. When did you last eat a proper meal? Sarah tried to remember and realized she couldn't. I am not sure. I haven't had much appetite lately. Jake's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice gentle. Why don't you lie down while I see what I can put together for dinner? You don't have to cook for me, Sarah protested. I can. No, you can't. Jake's tone was firm but not unkind. Doctor's orders, remember. Your job now is... Sarah unlocked the front door with trembling hands. She hadn't been inside since the morning she'd collapsed in the field. And somehow walking through the doorway with Jake behind her felt like crossing a threshold into a different life. The inside was sparse but clean, with simple furniture and faded curtains that had once been blue. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light, and the air smelled of loneliness and barely remembered cooking spices. The bedroom's upstairs, Sarah said, suddenly self-conscious about the intimacy of having a man in her home. I can make up the sofa for you, or there's a small room off the kitchen that Robert used for his accounts. The sofa will be fine, Jake said, setting down the supplies Dr. Whitmore had insisted they take. You need to rest. When did you last eat a proper meal? Sarah tried to remember and realized she couldn't. I'm not sure. I haven't had much appetite lately. Jake's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice gentle. Why don't you lie down while I see what I can put together for dinner? You don't have to cook for me, Sarah protested. I can. No, you can't. Jake's tone was firm, but not unkind. Doctor's orders, remember. Your job now is to rest and let that baby grow. My job is everything else. Sarah wanted to argue, but the exhaustion was overwhelming. She'd been fighting alone for so long that the idea of someone else taking charge was both terrifying and deeply appealing. I'll just rest my eyes for a few minutes, she said, settling onto the sofa with a grateful sigh. Jake watched her fall asleep almost immediately, her face smoothing into peaceful lines he suspected she hadn't worn in months. Then he rolled up his sleeves and got to work. The kitchen was nearly bare, a few cans of beans, some flour, and not much else. Jake made a mental list of supplies they'd need, and started a simple stew with what he could find. While it simmered, he explored the rest of the house, noting repairs that needed to be made, and trying to understand the life Sarah shared with her husband. There were photographs on the mantel, Sarah, and a young man with kind eyes and strong hands, their wedding day bright with hope and possibility. Jake found himself studying the man's face, wondering what he would think of a stranger moving into his home, caring for his pregnant wife. The sound of Sarah stirring brought him back to the present. She sat up slowly, her hair mussed from sleep, and for a moment she looked confused about where she was. "How long was I asleep?" she asked. "About 2 hours. Feeling better?" Sarah took inventory of her body, and was surprised to realize she did feel better. The dizziness was gone, and for the first time in weeks, she felt genuinely hungry. "Something smells wonderful," she said, and Jake's face lit up with pleasure. "Just you, but it should help get some strength back into you." He ladled the fragrant mixture into bowls and set them on the small kitchen table. "I made a list of things we'll need from town tomorrow." Sarah looked at the list he'd written in surprisingly neat handwriting. Food, supplies, medicine, things she'd been doing without for months because she couldn't afford them. "Jake, I meant what I said about not being able to pay you. I don't have any money, and the farm isn't making anything right now." Jake sat down across from her, his expression serious. "Mrs. Matthews, Sarah, please, Sarah. I've been working other people's land for 15 years, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. I've got money saved up, more than I know what to do with. Let me spend it on something that matters." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, pushing stew around his bowl. "My mother died when I was 10, he said finally. "Fever took her, and my father just gave up. I spent the rest of my childhood shuffling between relatives who didn't really want me. I swore that if I ever had the chance to help someone the way I wished someone had helped us, I'd take it." Sarah reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just let me help." They finished their meal in comfortable silence, and as darkness fell outside the farmhouse windows, both of them felt something settling into place, a fragile beginning that neither quite dared to name. The days that followed fell into a pattern that surprised them both with its naturalness. Jake was up before dawn, tending to the most urgent repairs around the property, while Sarah slept late for the first time in months. By the time she woke, he usually had coffee brewing and something simple prepared for breakfast. "You're spoiling me," Sarah said one morning, watching him flip eggs in the old cast-iron skillet. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands curved around a cup of real coffee, a luxury she'd given up months ago. "Good," Jake replied without looking up. "You deserve to be spoiled." The simple statement made Sarah's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. Robert had been a good man, a loving husband, but he'd been raised to expect women to take care of the domestic duties. The idea of being cared for was foreign and wonderful. "I should be helping more," she said, though her protests had grown weaker each day as she felt her strength returning. "You're growing a baby," Jake said, finally turning to face her. "That's work enough." He set the plate in front of her, and Sarah noticed, not for the first time, how his hands moved with careful precision. Everything Jake did was deliberate, economical, efficient. He wasted no motion, no words, no energy. It was the way a man learned to move when he'd been taking care of himself for a long time. "Tell me about the ranch where you work," Sarah said, wanting to know more about this man who'd appeared in her life, like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known she was praying. Jake settled into the chair across from her with his own breakfast. "Worked," he corrected. "I quit when I brought you home." Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "You quit your job." "Jake, you can't." "I can. And I did." His tone was matter-of-fact. Thompson understood. "He's got a pregnant wife of his own. But what about your future? Your plans?" Jake was quiet for a moment, considering. "I never made plans past the next paycheck," he said finally. "Never saw the point. But lately, ... double quotes, he met her eyes. "Lately, I've been thinking maybe it's time I started something." In his voice made Sarah's pulse quicken. There was an intimacy in the way he looked at her, a warmth that had nothing to do with charity. "The baby's been active this morning," she said, changing the subject to safer ground. "I think all this good food is giving him energy." "Him?" Jake's eyes crinkled at the corners. "You're sure it's a boy?" Robert was convinced it was a boy. Said he could tell by the way I'm carrying. Sarah's hand moved to her belly automatically. He wanted to name him Thomas, after his father. Jake nodded, but something flickered across his face that Sarah couldn't quite read. Thomas is a good name. Later that morning, while Sarah rested on the front porch, Jake worked on replacing the broken fence posts that surrounded the kitchen garden. The physical labor felt good, and he found himself planning improvements to the property, a new chicken coop, repairs to the barn, maybe even expanding the garden plot. He was so absorbed in his work that he almost didn't hear Sarah's sharp intake of breath. Jake. Her voice was tight with pain. He dropped his tools and ran to the porch, finding her doubled over, her hands gripping her belly. What's wrong? It's probably nothing, she gasped. Just a pain. They come and go. Jake's heart was racing. How long has this been happening? Since this morning. But Dr. Whitmore said it was normal to have some discomfort. Another pain hit her, stronger this time, and she cried out. Jake didn't hesitate. He swept her up in his arms, carrying her to his horse. We're going to see the doctor, now. The ride to town seemed to take forever, with Sarah's pains coming more frequently and Jake pushing his horse harder than he ever had. By the time they reached Dr. Whitmore's office, Sarah was pale and shaking. False labor, the doctor pronounced after his examination. Common in the 8th month, especially with first babies. But it's a warning sign. The baby is getting ready, and Sarah needs to be even more careful. What does that mean? Jake asked, his voice tight with worry. It means no more excitement, no more stress. Complete bed rest until the baby comes. Dr. Whitmore's expression was serious. And it means you need to be prepared. This baby could arrive any time in the next few weeks. On the ride home, Sarah was quiet, her head resting against Jake's chest. The false labor had scared her more than she wanted to admit. But what scared her even more was the realization that she'd been leaning on Jake's strength so completely that she couldn't imagine facing childbirth without him. Jake, she said softly as they approached the farmhouse. Yeah, what happens after the baby comes? Jake's arms tightened around her slightly. What do you mean? You can't stay here forever. You have your own life to live. Jake was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. What if I want to stay? The question hung in the air between them, full of possibility and fear, and the kind of hope that could either heal or destroy them both. The storm hit 3 days later, with the fury of a scorned woman, bringing with it winds that howled like banshees, and rain that fell in sheets so thick Jake could barely see. His hand in front of his face, he'd spent the morning reinforcing the barn doors and securing anything that could become a projectile. But the storm was bigger than he'd anticipated. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching him struggle against the wind, her heart in her throat every time a gust nearly knocked him off his feet. The baby had been restless all day, rolling and kicking as if responding to the electric tension in the air. Come away from the window, she told herself, but she couldn't move. The sight of Jake fighting the elements to keep her safe did something to her heart that she wasn't ready to examine too closely. When he finally made it back to the house, he was soaked to the skin and breathing hard. Sarah had towels ready and hot coffee waiting, and the domestic intimacy of caring for him made her pulse flutter in a way that had nothing to do with the baby. You need to get out of those wet clothes, she said, then blushed at her own boldness. Jake's eyes met hers, and for a moment the air between them crackled with something more dangerous than the lightning outside. I'll change in the kitchen, he said quietly. Sarah retreated to the living room, but she could hear him moving around, and her imagination filled in what she couldn't see. When he emerged in dry clothes, his hair still damp and curling slightly. At the ends, she felt her breath catch. Storm's getting worse, he said, settling beside her on the sofa. We might lose power. As if summoned by his words, the lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness, broken only by the occasional flash of lightning. Jake moved to light the oil lamps Sarah had set out, and in the warm golden glow, the small room felt impossibly intimate. I should go to my room, Sarah said, but she made no move to leave. Sarah, Jake's voice was low, rough with an emotion she recognized because she felt it too. We need to talk. She turned to face him, her heart hammering. About what? About what's happening between us. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah felt her cheeks burn, but she couldn't look away from his face. Nothing's happening. You're helping me, and I'm grateful. Don't. Jake's hand covered hers, and the contact sent sparks up her arm. Don't pretend you don't feel it too. Sarah's breath came in short gasps. I'm pregnant with another man's child. I'm in mourning. I have no right to feel anything. Your husband's been dead for 6 months, Jake said gently. You're not betraying his memory by living. But I am betraying it by wanting you. The words escaped before she could stop them, and she immediately tried to pull her hand away. Jake held on, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. Robert loved you. Don't you think he'd want you to be happy? Not like this. Not so soon. Sarah's voice broke. What kind of woman does that make me? Human, Jake said simply. It makes you human. Thunder crashed overhead, and Sarah jumped. The baby responded to her elevated heart rate with a series of strong kicks that made her gasp and press her hand to her belly. He's really active tonight, she murmured, grateful for the distraction. Tonight, Jake gestured toward her belly, and Sarah felt her heart skip. You don't have to, I want to. Sarah took his hand and placed it over the spot where the baby was, moving most actively. Jake's eyes widened as he felt the strong kicks against his palm. He's strong, Jake said, wonder in his voice. He's going to be a fighter, like his father. Sarah's voice was soft, but there was sadness in it too. Jake looked up at her, his hand still resting on her belly, and like his mother, the baby kicked again, directly under Jake's hand, and both adults laughed despite the tension between them. For a moment, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, the three of them together, waiting out the storm. Sarah. When I think about the future, about what I want my life to look like, I see you. I see this baby. I see us together. His voice was steady. Sure. I know it's crazy. I know it's too soon. But I can't help it. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. Jake, I'm not asking you to make any decisions now. I'm just asking you to think about it. About us. About what we could be. Before Sarah could respond, a massive crash of thunder shook the house, followed immediately by the sound of splintering wood. Jake was on his feet instantly, peering out the window. Tree came down, he said grimly. Big one. Right across the front path. We're not going anywhere for a while. Sarah tried to stand, but a sharp pain in her lower back made her gasp. Jake was beside her immediately, his hand steady on her shoulders. What's wrong? Just my back. The baby's been sitting differently today. But even as she said it, another pain gripped her, stronger this time, and she couldn't hide her sharp intake of breath. Jake's face went pale. Sarah, how long have you been having pains? They're not labor pains, she insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. It's too early. Another contraction hit, and this time Sarah couldn't suppress her cry. Jake's training with horses and cattle had taught him to recognize the signs of imminent birth, and what he saw in Sarah's face made his blood run cold. Sarah, I think this baby is coming. Tonight, the storm raged outside, trapping them in the small farmhouse with no way to reach the doctor. Sarah was in labor, and Jake was about to become the only person standing between her and whatever complications might arise, as if reading his thoughts. Sarah gripped his hand tightly. Don't leave me, she whispered. Never, Jake promised, and meant it with every fiber of his being. The contractions came faster as the storm raged, and Sarah found herself gripping Jake's hand with a strength that surprised them both. She'd prepared for this moment for months, but she'd always imagined having Dr. Whitmore there, having other women to help her through it. She'd never imagined it would be just her, and a cowboy who'd delivered more colts than babies. I can't do this, she gasped between contractions, her hair matted with sweat. Yes, you can, Jake said firmly, his voice the only steady thing in her world. You're the strongest person I know. I'm scared, she admitted, and the vulnerability in her voice made Jake's chest ache. So am I, he said honestly. But we're going to do this together. Jake had moved her to the bedroom and gathered what supplies he could find. Clean sheets, hot water, towels. His hands were steady as he helped her through each contraction. But inside, his heart was racing. He'd seen birth before, but never like this, never with someone he cared about so deeply. Tell me about Robert, he said during a brief lull, trying to keep her mind occupied. Tell me about your wedding day. Sarah's face softened even through her pain. It was spring. April. The apple trees were blooming, and I felt like a princess in my mother's wedding dress. She paused as another contraction gripped her. He was so nervous he dropped the ring during the ceremony. Did you know you loved him right away? No, Sarah said, surprising him. I liked him well enough, but love, love grew slowly, like a seed that needs time to take root. She looked at Jake with eyes dark with pain and something else. Sometimes I wonder if that's the only way real love happens. Jake understood what she was trying to tell him, and his heart swelled with hope, even as his hands remained focused on the task at hand. The labor progressed through the night, with the storm providing a dramatic backdrop to the ancient ritual of birth. Jake proved to be exactly what Sarah needed: calm when she panicked, strong when she felt weak, gentle when the pain threatened to overwhelm her. "I can see the head," Jake said, his voice tight with emotion. "Sarah, you're almost there." "I can't," she sobbed. "I can't do any more." "Look at me," Jake commanded, and something in his voice made her obey. "You can do this. This baby needs you to do this. I need you to do this." Sarah found strength she didn't know she possessed. With one final push that seemed to tear her apart and put her back together again, she brought her son into the world. The baby's cry pierced the night, strong and healthy and absolutely perfect. Jake's hands were shaking as he caught the tiny, slippery body and wrapped him in a clean towel. "He's beautiful," Jake whispered, and Sarah could see tears on his cheeks. "He's perfect." Sarah reached for her son with trembling arms, and when Jake placed him on her chest, she felt her heart expand in ways she'd never thought possible. The baby was small, but strong, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to already be searching for something. "Hello, Thomas," she whispered, and the baby's crying quieted at the sound of her voice. Jake watched them together, mother and son, and felt something shift inside him so profound it took his breath away. This was what he'd been searching for, without knowing it: not just a woman to love, but a family to belong to. "Thank you," Sarah said, looking up at Jake with eyes shining with gratitude and something deeper. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You could have," Jake said, settling beside them on the bed. "But I'm glad you didn't have to." Thomas made a small sound, and both adults looked down at him in wonder. His tiny hand had worked free of the towel, and as Jake watched, the baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength. "He likes you," Sarah said softly. "I like him too," Jake replied, and his voice was rough with emotion. Outside, the storm was beginning to subside, but inside the small farmhouse, a new chapter was beginning. Sarah looked at Jake holding her son's hand and felt something settle into place in her heart, a recognition that this was right, that this was how it was supposed to be. "Jake," she said quietly. "Yeah, earlier, when you said you saw us together in your future, ... Jake's eyes met hers, hope and fear warring in their depths. "Yeah, I see it too," she whispered. "I see us too." Jake leaned down and kissed her forehead, gently, careful not to disturb the baby. "We're going to be okay," he said. "All of us." As the first light of dawn crept through the bedroom window, Sarah fell asleep with her son in her arms, and Jake watching over them both. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and full of possibility. The days following Thomas's birth passed in a haze of feeding schedules, diaper changes, and the peculiar exhaustion that comes with caring for a newborn. Dr. Whitmore had finally made it to the farmhouse once the roads were clear, and his examination of both mother and baby had put everyone's minds at ease. "You did good work," he told Jake privately. "That baby might not have made it if you hadn't been here." Jake felt a surge of pride and something deeper, a sense of purpose he'd never experienced before. Thomas had been in the world for 5 days, and already Jake couldn't imagine life without him. Sarah was recovering well, though she tired easily. Jake had taken over every aspect of running the household, and his competence in the kitchen and with the baby constantly amazed her. He changed diapers with the same careful precision he used to mend fences, and he could calm Thomas's crying with a gentleness that made Sarah's heart ache. "You're a natural," she told him one evening as they sat together on the sofa, Thomas sleeping peacefully in Jake's arms. "I had good teachers," Jake replied. "Spent a summer working for a family with 6 kids. The mother made sure I knew the basics." Sarah watched the way Jake looked at her son with such tenderness and protectiveness that it took her breath away. "Jake, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Do you ever want children of your own? I mean your own biological children?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on Thomas's tiny hand. "I used to think about it sometimes," he said finally. "But I never thought I'd meet someone I'd want to have them with." He looked up at Sarah. "Now, I think, maybe I already have." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "He's not yours though, not really, isn't he?" Jake's voice was soft but certain. "I'm the one who caught him when he came into this world. I'm the one who's been feeding him and changing him and walking the floor with him when he cries. Biology doesn't make a father, Sarah. Love does." The simple truth of his words made Sarah's chest tight with emotion. Robert would have loved him so much. "Robert did love him," Jake said gently. And he loves you enough to send you someone who could help you both. Sarah looked at Jake in wonder. Is that what you think happened? That Robert sent you? I think, Jake said carefully, that sometimes the universe has a way of putting people where they need to be. Thomas stirred in Jake's arms, making the soft sounds that meant he was waking up. Jake passed him to Sarah for feeding, and she marveled at how now. I've been thinking, Sarah said as Thomas latched on eagerly, about what happens next. Jake's body tensed slightly. What do you mean? I mean with us. With this. She gestured at the domestic scene around them. I can't keep letting you take care of us without knowing what you want in return. I don't want anything in return, Jake said firmly. I want to be here because I choose to be here. But for how long? Until Thomas is walking. Until he's grown. What happens when you get tired of playing house with a widow and her child? Jake stood abruptly, running his hands through his hair. Is that what you think this is? Playing house? I don't know what to think, Sarah admitted. I've never been in a situation like this. Neither have I, Jake said, his voice rough. But I know what I feel. I know that I love you, Sarah. I love Thomas. I love this life we're building together. Sarah's breath caught. You love me. I've loved you since the moment I saw you lying in that field, Jake said simply. I've loved you through every day since then. I'll love you for the rest of my life if you'll let me. Jake, Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. I'm not asking you to love me back, Jake continued. Not yet. I know you're still grieving Robert, and I know this is all complicated. But I'm asking you to let me stay. Let me be Thomas's father. Let me be your husband, if you'll have me. Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling. You want to marry me? I want to marry you, Jake confirmed. I want to adopt Thomas legally. I want to fix up this farm and make it profitable again. I want to give you more children, if you want them. I want to grow old with you. Thomas had finished feeding and was looking up at Sarah with bright, alert eyes. She looked down at her son, then back at Jake, and something clicked into place in her heart. I do love you, she said quietly. I'd been afraid to admit it, because it felt like a betrayal of Robert's memory. But I love you, Jake Morrison. Love the way you take care of us. I love your gentleness and your strength. I love the way you look at Thomas, like he's the most precious thing in the world. Jake's face transformed with joy. Sarah, Yes, she said, before he could finish the question. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I want you to be Thomas's father. Yes, I want to build a life with you. Jake crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside the sofa, his hands framing Sarah's face as he kissed her with all the love and hope he'd been carrying in his heart. It was their first kiss, tender and sweet and full of promise. Thomas made a soft sound between them, and they broke apart, laughing, both of them looking down at the baby who would be the foundation of their new family. When? Jake asked, his forehead resting against Sarah's. Soon, Sarah said. I want Thomas to be old enough to be part of the ceremony, but not so old that he won't remember it. I'll talk to Pastor Williams tomorrow, Jake said, and I'll ride to the county seat to get the adoption papers started. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. For the first time since Robert's death, she felt like she had a future to look forward to instead of just a past to mourn. I love you, she whispered against Jake's lips. I love you too, he replied. Both of you, forever. 3 months later, on a crisp October morning, when the leaves were turning gold and red, Sarah Matthews became Sarah Morrison in a ceremony that was simple, but perfect. Thomas, now 4 months old and thriving, was held by Jake throughout the service. His tiny hand wrapped around his soon-to-be father's finger. Pastor Williams had been delighted to perform the ceremony, especially after Dr. Whitmore had filled him in on the unusual circumstances of their courtship. The small church was filled with neighbors and friends who had watched Jake transform from a drifting cowboy into a devoted husband and father. You look beautiful, Jake whispered to Sarah as they stood at the altar. She was wearing a dress she'd sewn herself from fabric. Jake had insisted on buying a deep blue that brought out her eyes and made her skin glow with happiness. You clean up pretty well yourself, Sarah replied, admiring the way Jake looked in his best suit, his hair neatly combed and his face shining with joy. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but the meaning behind them was anything but ordinary. When Jake promised to love, honor, and cherish Sarah, he was also promising to be the father Thomas needed. When Sarah vowed to love Jake in sickness and in health, she was promising to trust him with her heart and her son's future. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Pastor Williams said with a broad smile. Jake, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was sweet and brief, mindful of their audience, but it carried the weight of all their hopes and dreams. Thomas chose that moment to make a happy gurgling sound, and the congregation erupted in laughter and applause. The reception was held at the farmhouse, which Jake had spent weeks preparing. The roof was fixed, the porch was solid, and the house had been painted inside and out. Sarah's kitchen garden was flourishing, and the barn was full of the livestock Jake had gradually acquired. Look at what you've built, Sarah said to Jake, as they stood on the front porch, watching their guests mingle in the yard. Thomas was napping in her arms, exhausted by all the excitement. What we've built, Jake corrected. This is our home, Sarah, our family. Dr. Whitmore approached them with a glass of punch and a huge smile. I have to say, I've never seen a more successful prescription. Jake, you've done wonders for both of them. They've done wonders for me too, Jake replied, his arm tightening around Sarah's waist. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the guests gradually departed. Jake and Sarah found themselves alone on their front porch, Thomas finally sleeping peacefully in his cradle. Mrs. Morrison, Jake said, testing out the name. I like the sound of that, Sarah replied, settling into the chair beside him. Any regrets? Jake asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Only one, Sarah said, and Jake's face fell slightly. I wish Robert could have met you. I think he would have liked you. Jake reached for her hand. I hope so. I hope he knows that I'll take care of you both. He knows, Sarah said with certainty. I can feel it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. The farm, spread out around them, peaceful and prosperous, a testament to what two people could build together when they were. Thank you for catching me that day. Jake brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Thank you for falling. 2 years later, Sarah stood in the same kitchen where Jake had first cooked for her. But now she was the one preparing breakfast while he worked outside. Thomas, now a sturdy toddler with his father's steady hands and his mother's determined spirit, was sitting in his high chair, making a spectacular mess with his oatmeal. Dada, Thomas called out the window, and Sarah smiled as she watched Jake look up from the fence he was mending and wave at his son. The adoption had gone through without a hitch. 6 months after their wedding, Thomas Morrison was now legally Jake's son, and no one who saw them together would ever question it. Jake had taught the boy to walk, had been there for his first words, and was already planning to teach him to ride. Mama, Thomas pointed at Sarah's expanding belly, where his little brother or sister was growing. Baby, that's right, sweetheart, Sarah said, rubbing her hand over the gentle swell. Baby's going to be here soon. This pregnancy was different from her first. She had Jake's steady presence, Thomas's joy, and the security of knowing she wasn't facing anything alone. Dr. Whitmore had pronounced her in excellent health, and Jake had taken to treating her like precious china, much to her amusement. You're not made of glass, she'd told him just yesterday when he'd insisted on carrying the laundry basket. No, Jake had replied with a grin, but you're carrying my baby, and that makes you the most valuable thing in the world. Sarah had melted, just as she always did when Jake said things like that. Even after 2 years of marriage, he still had the power to make her heart skip with his casual declarations of love. The kitchen door opened, and Jake walked in, bringing the scent of hay and sunshine with him. He kissed Sarah's cheek and ruffled Thomas's hair before washing his hands at the sink. How are my 3 favorite people this morning? He asked, and Sarah felt the familiar flutter of happiness that came with being claimed so completely. 4, Sarah corrected, placing his hand on her belly. Don't forget about this one. Never, Jake said solemnly, then grinned as the baby kicked against his palm. He's going to be a strong one. Or she, Sarah reminded him. Or she, Jake agreed. Though I have to admit, I'm hoping for a girl this time. A little girl who looks just like her mother. Sarah blushed. Even after all this time. What would we name her? I've been thinking about that, Jake said, settling into his chair at the table. What about Grace? Grace Morrison. Grace, Sarah repeated, testing the name. I like it. Grace. For a girl. And what about a boy? Robert, Jake said, without hesitation. If you're comfortable with that. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. After all this time, Jake was still thinking of her first husband, still honoring his memory. He would have loved that, she said softly. Bah. Thomas contributed to the conversation, banging his spoon on his high-chair tray. That's right, son, Jake said seriously. Very insightful. Sarah laughed, the sound bright and musical in the morning air. This was her life, no messy breakfasts and gentle teasing, and the kind of love that grew deeper every day. She'd never imagined she could be this happy. I got a letter from the county agent yesterday, Jake said, pulling out an official-looking envelope. He wants to know if we'd be interested in selling some of our wheat seed to other farmers. Says our yield this year was impressive. Sarah beamed with pride. Under Jake's management, the farm had not only recovered, but was thriving. He'd expanded the wheat fields, added corn and soybeans, and built up a small but profitable herd of cattle. What did you tell him? I told him I'd discuss it with my partner, Jake said, and Sarah's heart swelled at being included in the decision. Your partner thinks it's a wonderful idea, she said, leaning over to kiss him. Dada, mama. Kiss. Thomas clapped his hands in delight, and both parents laughed. He's going to be trouble, Sarah predicted, looking at her son's mischievous grin. The best kind of trouble, Jake agreed, lifting Thomas out of his high chair and tossing him gently in the air. The little boy shrieked with laughter, and Sarah felt her heart expand with so much love, she thought it might burst. Later that evening, after Thomas was asleep and the dishes were done, Sarah and Jake sat on their front porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The farm stretched out around them, golden and peaceful, and Sarah marveled at how much their lives had changed. Do you ever miss it? She asked. The freedom of being on your own, going wherever you wanted. Jake was quiet for a moment, his arm tightening around her shoulders. I was never free before I met you, he said finally. I was just lost. This he gestured at the farm, at Thomas's toys scattered in the yard, at Sarah's pregnant belly. This is freedom. This is home. Sarah leaned against him, feeling the baby move lazily inside her. I love you, Jake Morrison. I love you too, Sarah Morrison. More than I ever thought possible. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Sarah closed her eyes and made a silent promise to Robert's memory that she would love Jake and their children with the same fierce devotion she'd once felt for him, and that she would never take for granted the miracle of a second chance at happiness. 5 years had passed since that October day when Jake Morrison had found Sarah Matthews collapsed in the wheat field, and the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The Morrison farm was now one of the most prosperous in the county, with Jake's careful management and Sarah's keen eye for innovation making them a formidable team. Thomas, now 7 years old, was racing through the wheat fields with his 4-year-old sister Grace, their laughter carrying on the summer breeze. Grace had indeed inherited her mother's looks, with dark hair and warm brown eyes, but she had Jake's quiet strength and determination. 2-year-old Robert Bobby, as everyone called him, was toddling after his siblings, as fast as his chubby legs could carry him, his blonde hair catching the sunlight as he tried to keep up with the older children. Be careful, Sarah called from the porch, where she sat shelling peas with her newest baby, 6-month-old Elizabeth, sleeping in her arms. At 32, Sarah had found a contentment she'd never dreamed possible, her life full of the chaos and Jake emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, his face creased with the kind of lines that came from years of genuine happiness. At 37, he'd grown into his role as husband and father with a natural ease that still amazed Sarah. Thomas, he called to his eldest son, come help me with the horses. Thomas ran to his father eagerly, his face bright with excitement. The adoption papers had been signed so long ago that no one even remembered he wasn't Jake's biological son. The boy adored his father, and Jake had poured all his love and knowledge into raising him. Can I ride Thunder today? Thomas asked hopefully. We'll see, Jake said, ruffling the boy's hair. First you need to show me you can properly clean a stall. Sarah watched the interaction with a smile. Jake was firm but fair with the children, teaching them responsibility while never forgetting to show them affection. He'd taken to fatherhood like he'd taken to everything else, with complete dedication and surprising skill. Mama, look. Grace ran up to the porch, her apron full of wildflowers. I picked these for you. They're beautiful, sweetheart, Sarah said, accepting the slightly wilted bouquet. Why don't you put them in the vase on the kitchen table? Grace beamed and ran inside, Bobby trailing behind her, chattering in the mixture of real words and toddler gibberish that only his family could understand. Dr. Whitmore's buggy appeared on the horizon, and Sarah felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. The doctor only made house calls when something was wrong, or when ... double quotes Sarah. He called as he approached. I've got news. Jake appeared at Sarah's side, his face creased with concern. What's wrong, Doc? Nothing's wrong, Dr. Whitmore said with a huge grin. Everything's right. I just got word from the county. Jake, you've been selected as Farmer of the Year. They want to feature your operation in the state agricultural magazine. Sarah felt her heart swell with pride. Jake, that's wonderful. I don't understand, Jake said, looking genuinely puzzled. I just farmed the way my father taught me, and the way you've guided me, Doc. That's exactly why you deserve it, Dr. Whitmore said. You've taken a failing farm and turned it into a model operation. You've employed half the young men in the county. You've introduced new crops and farming techniques, and you've done it all while raising a beautiful family. Sarah stood up, carefully cradling baby Elizabeth, and went to Jake's side. He's right. You've accomplished something amazing here. Jake looked around at the farm, at the neat fields, the well-maintained buildings, the children playing in the yard, the wife who stood beside him with such pride in her eyes. We've accomplished something amazing, he corrected. All of us, together. That evening, after the children were asleep and the farm was quiet, Sarah and Jake sat on their porch swing, the same one where they'd shared so many conversations over the years. Elizabeth was nursing contentedly, and Sarah marveled at how natural it all felt. Do you remember what you told me that first night? Sarah asked. When you said you never made plans past the next paycheck. Jake chuckled. I remember. Seems like a lifetime ago. What are your plans now? Jake was quiet for a moment, his hand resting on Sarah's shoulder. I want to see Thomas graduate from high school, maybe go to college if that's what he wants. I want to walk Grace down the aisle at her wedding someday. I want to teach Bobby how to farm this land, if he's interested. I want to watch Elizabeth grow up to be as strong and beautiful as her mother. And after that, Sarah prompted, after that, I want to grow old with you. I want to sit on this porch when we're 80 and watch our grandchildren play in the same fields where their parents grew up. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. That sounds like a perfect plan. Sarah, Jake said softly, I need to tell you something. What? I went to the cemetery yesterday. To Robert's grave. Sarah stiffened slightly, but Jake continued. I wanted to thank him. For you. For Thomas. For the life we have. I know it sounds crazy, but I felt like I needed to tell him that I've kept my promise to take care of you both. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. What did you say? I told him that you're happy. That Thomas is growing up strong and good. That you have other children now who will carry on both your legacies. I told him. Jake's voice grew thick with emotion. I told him that I love you both so much that I understand why losing you nearly killed him. Sarah reached for Jake's hand. He would have been grateful. He would have been proud of the man Thomas is becoming. And he would have loved our other children. I hope so, Jake said. I hope he knows that I never tried to replace him. I just tried to love you the way you deserved to be loved. You did more than that, Sarah said softly. You saved us. You gave us a future when we had none. As if summoned by their conversation, Thomas appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep. Dad, he said, using the name that had come so naturally over the years. I had a dream about the wheat field. About the day you found Mama. Jake and Sarah exchanged a look. They'd told Thomas the story many times, but he'd never dreamed about it before. What happened in the dream? Sarah asked gently. I was there, Thomas said, climbing onto the swing between his parents. I was just a baby, but I was there. And I saw you catch Mama when she fell. And I heard someone say thank you. Sarah felt her breath catch. Who said thank you? I don't know, Thomas said sleepily. But it sounded like someone who loved us. Jake pulled his son close, his eyes meeting Sarah's over the boy's head. That's because someone did love you, he said quietly. Someone who wanted to make sure you were taken care of. As Thomas drifted back to sleep between them, Sarah and Jake sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast prairie sky. The farm stretched out around them, peaceful and prosperous, a testament to what could be built when love and determination came together. Jake, Sarah said softly. Yeah, thank you for catching me. Jake shifted baby Elizabeth to one arm, pulled Sarah closer with the other. Thank you for letting me. As the night settled around them, the Morrison family sat together on their porch, surrounded by the life they'd built from the ashes of tragedy. The wheat fields rustled in the gentle breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its sweet song. Sarah closed her eyes and felt the presence of everyone who had brought them to this moment. Robert, who had loved her first and given her Thomas. Jake, who had loved her completely and given her a future. And their children, who were the living proof that love could indeed conquer all. The circle was complete. The promise fulfilled. and the love that had begun with a chance encounter in a wheat field had grown into something eternal, a legacy that would endure for generations to come. In the end, it wasn't about the dramatic rescue or the storm-tossed birth, or even the unlikely romance. It was about the quiet moments like this, one a family together, safe and loved, watching the stars appear in the endless sky above their home. It was about the powerful truth that sometimes the most profound love stories begin not with passion, but with compassion, not with desire, but with duty, not with fire, but with the steady, enduring warmth of two people who choose each other every day, building something beautiful and lasting from the simple decision to care. And as Sarah Morrison sat on her porch swing, surrounded by the husband who had saved her and the children who had redeemed them both, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found what every heart truly seeks, not just someone to love, but someone to build a life with, someone to grow old with, someone to leave a legacy with. The pregnant widow who had fallen in the field had been caught not just by strong arms, but by an even stronger love. And in being caught, she had found not just safety, but salvation. Not just rescue, but redemption. Not just survival, but the kind of deep, abiding joy that comes from knowing you are exactly where you belong. The wheat field where it all began still stretched golden in the distance. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, Sarah could swear she heard it whispering the same promise Jake had made to her on that first day. "I've got you, you're safe now." And she was. They all were, forever and always, safe in the arms of a love that had been strong enough